A shy and reserved 14-year-old boy named Ethan always kept to himself. Sitting in the last row of Mrs. Bennett's classroom, he arrived each day with his head down, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Mrs. Bennett couldn't help but worry about him. She had noticed faint, unexplained marks on his arms, barely visible beneath his long sleeves. Whenever she gently asked about them, Ethan would offer a brief, deflective answer like, "It's nothing," and quickly change the subject. Ethan lived with his foster parents, Harold and Lydia Taylor, a couple celebrated in the community for their charity work. They were frequent faces at local events, always smiling, always gracious. People called them saints for opening their home to a boy in need. But Mrs. Bennett felt uneasy. The sadness in Ethan's eyes and the tension in his demeanor hinted at a far darker reality. One day, Mrs. Bennett asked Ethan to stay after class. She leaned in gently, her tone filled with concern. "Ethan, is everything okay at home? You can tell me if something's wrong?" For a fleeting moment, Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but he quickly looked away and shook his head. "I'm fine," he mumbled before leaving the room in a hurry. But Mrs. Bennett wasn't convinced. She had heard those words before, too often, from children who were afraid to speak the truth. Over the next week, Mrs. Bennett noticed new bruises on Ethan's arms and the way he flinched if anyone got too close. Her worry turned into determination. That evening, she filed a report with Child Services, detailing her observations. An investigator visited the Taylors' home the following day. Harold and Lydia welcomed the social worker with warm smiles and a picture-perfect living room. They dismissed the accusations, blaming Ethan's injuries on his clumsiness. Ethan, sitting quietly in the corner, nodded in agreement, too scared to contradict them. With no solid evidence, the case was closed. But Mrs. Bennett refused to give up. She started documenting everything, every new bruise, every concerning word from Ethan's classmates, every suspicious interaction she observed. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Harold and Lydia's cruelty escalated. They began punishing Ethan more harshly, isolating him, and reminding him daily that no one would believe his word over theirs. One morning, Ethan limped into class, his face streaked with dried tears. That was the breaking point for Mrs. Bennett. She marched straight to the principal's office, demanding that the authorities intervene again. This time, with her meticulous records and statements from two students who had witnessed Harold yelling at Ethan outside school. The case was reopened. The Taylors, furious, tried to have Ethan transferred to another school, but the investigation prevented it. Soon after, a neighbor of the Taylors captured a chilling recording on their phone. The audio revealed Harold shouting insults at Ethan while the boy's trembling voice begged for mercy. This recording, combined with Mrs. Bennett's evidence, led to an emergency court hearing. On the day of the trial, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Harold and Lydia arrived dressed impeccably, projecting an air of righteousness. Mrs. Bennett sat near the back with Ethan, silently offering him encouragement. He sat stiffly, his hands gripping the bench as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Presiding over the hearing was Judge Clara Reed, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach to justice. As she reviewed the evidence, Harold's lawyer quickly began crafting a defense, painting Harold and Lydia as caring foster parents trying to help a troubled boy. Ethan shrank in his seat, his heart pounding. When it was Ethan's turn to testify, the room fell silent. He shuffled to the stand, his every step weighed down by fear. Harold's piercing stare was a silent command. "Say nothing." Lydia's carefully constructed look of sorrow only deepened his sense of hopelessness. The judge leaned forward, her tone kind yet firm. "Ethan, this is a safe place. We're here to help you, but we need you to tell the truth." Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the stand. His throat felt dry, his mind swirling with panic. Harold's lawyer wasted no time hurling loaded questions at him, implying he was exaggerating or misunderstanding discipline. The judge raised her hand, silencing the lawyer. She turned back to Ethan, her gaze steady. "Ethan, are you safe at home?" He stared at the polished wood of the stand, his mind racing. Memories of the nights he spent locked in his room without food and the sharp sting of Harold's punishments filled his thoughts. Then he remembered Mrs. Bennet's unwavering belief in him, her kind words that he deserved better. Slowly, he lifted his gaze. "No," he whispered, then louder. "It's not safe." The courtroom froze. Those 3 words carried the weight of everything he had endured. Judge Reed's expression shifted, a pallor crossing her face as the significance of his statement sank in. "Ethan," she said gently, "can you explain what you mean by not safe?" Tears streamed down his face as he began to speak. "They hurt me," he said, his voice cracking. "They call me names and say I'm worthless. They said if I told anyone, they'd make me sorry." Each word felt like a release, the weight on his chest easing with every sentence. Harold leaped to his feet, his face red with rage. "He's lying," he bellowed. "We've given him everything. This is how he repays us." Lydia chimed in with a teary plea. "We've only ever wanted to help him. He's just confused." Judge Reed's voice cut through the commotion like a blade. "Enough. This court will not tolerate intimidation." She ordered the audio recording to be played. The room filled with the harsh sound of Harold's insults and Ethan's terrified sobs. As the recording ended, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Reed turned to Harold and Lydia, her expression steely. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said coldly. "This stops now." When the recording ended, the silence was profound. Judge Reed turned to Ethan, her voice steady. "Thank you for your courage. This court will not let you down." Her expression hardened as she addressed Harold and Lydia. "The evidence is clear. Ethan will be removed from your custody, and you will face charges for neglect and emotional abuse." Harold's face contorted in anger. "This is your fault," he shouted at Mrs. Bennet, while Lydia dissolved into tears. Bailiffs stepped in, escorting them from the room. Judge Reed struck her gavel. "Order." Ethan stepped down, trembling, tears streaking his face, but a wave of relief washed over him. Mrs. Bennet placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's over," she said gently. "You were so brave." Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing. Mrs. Bennet shielded Ethan from the chaos, guiding him away. Word of the Taylors' cruelty spread quickly, and their once glowing reputation crumbled. Meanwhile, Ethan was placed with the Hendersons, a kind couple who specialized in helping children heal. They offered him patience and a stable home. A week later, Mrs. Bennet visited. Ethan looked healthier and more at ease in his new room, its walls painted a soft green. She handed him a notebook and pencils, which he accepted with a shy smile. "I'm joining the art club," he said, showing her a vibrant new drawing. "I feel safe now." Mrs. Bennet beamed. "You deserve that. Ethan, you've come so far." At school, Ethan began to thrive, sitting closer to the front and smiling more often. His story spread, inspiring others to find their voices. One day after class, Ethan lingered. "You never gave up on me," he said softly. Mrs. Bennet smiled. "Because you deserve better. But you were the one who found your courage." Ethan laughed lightly, and I made a judge go speechless. She chuckled. "That you did, Ethan, that you did." 2 words, "not safe," had changed everything, unlocking a future filled with hope. It was a moment of bravery that would inspire others to speak, proving the power of a voice finally heard.